Scripture reading will be from Matthew 26, 6 through 13. Now when Jesus was in Bethany, at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. But the disciples were indignant when they saw this, and said, "Why this waste? For this perfume might have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good deed to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. For when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in memory of her."
Go ahead and open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 26. We'll be following along with the text there this evening. We'll also be looking at what John says about this event and what Mark says as well, as they recorded it in their gospel accounts. But I think that this event that takes place here with Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus, I think it's a very powerful event. And we see so many different attitudes exhibited during these interactions that Jesus has in this home in Bethany. Verse 6 tells us in Matthew chapter 26, now when Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper. John 12 tells us, as it records this same account there, it tells us that this was 6 days before the Passover. So what we're talking about here is it is Saturday night. Jesus will die the following Friday, and this is Saturday night. The next morning, on Sunday morning, Jesus will enter into the city of Jerusalem in what we call the triumphant entry. And so these are the events that are beginning to set into, we're actually beginning the events of the final week of our Lord's life upon this earth. It tells us that Lazarus was there. It's just been a short period of time, probably within just weeks, a couple of weeks, of the time in which Jesus healed Lazarus, raised Lazarus from the dead, in John chapter 11. He's still a little bit of a novelty. It says that people came from all over when they heard that Jesus was there and Lazarus was there. They wanted to see Jesus, but they also wanted to see the guy that had been dead for 4 days, right? Because it said they also came to see Lazarus. They wanted to see him. And he is this great proof. In fact, he's so much this great proof of Jesus and His power, in that even at this particular moment, the Jewish leaders, the chief priests, are planning to kill Lazarus again as well, along with Jesus. They've got to get rid of Lazarus. They've got to get rid of a walking testament to the power of Jesus as the resurrection and the life. It tells us that Martha was serving the supper here at this house in Bethany. It may have been Martha's home, and there's a good chance that that's exactly where it was. It says that it's the home of Simon the leper, and that may have been Martha's husband, may have been some other member of Martha's family. And we just have to wonder, don't we? You know, Jesus has such a close relationship with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and we see that relationship in several places. You know, it's one of they are a group of people that in John chapter 12, or John chapter 11 rather, says that Jesus loved them. He loved Lazarus. You know, there was a close and special relationship there, and you just wonder, how can Simon the leper be in the house? You know, he would certainly, if he was actually a leper now, at this particular point, he would not be allowed to be in the presence of other people under the law of Moses. So he may very well have been maybe the first step to this family getting close to Jesus, may have been healed by Jesus as a leper. And so now this is a house that Jesus comes to. This is a place that He comes to whenever He's visiting Jerusalem. And He stays here in Bethany. You know, thinking about Him staying there in Bethany, you know, Bethany's just on the other side of the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem. So as Jesus would come and walk the little over a mile distance between those two places, He would come over the Mount of Olives, go through the Garden of Gethsemane and into the Valley of Kidron, and then up into the temple area. And so, you know, this is the route that He takes. This is the route of the of the triumphant entry. If you go there today, the Jews are still looking for the Christ to come over the Mount of Olives. They're still looking for Him to enter into the city and take His place. In fact, when you see pictures of it today, you see all those tombs above ground, right? All those sepulchres out there, and they're all facing the direction of the city, because they say one day the Messiah is going to come over that hill, and they're all going to rise and walk with Him into the city. And what's so sad is that they missed it. It's happened. It's going to happen the next morning after this event, as Jesus enters into that city. The Messiah enters into the city of Jerusalem to take his role as Messiah, to save mankind, to establish that kingdom of heaven. Gethsemane was a midway point between Bethany and the city of Jerusalem, and so when Luke tells us that it was the habit of Jesus to stop and to be in Gethsemane. And that's how, certainly Judas knew where Jesus would be. That's just where they stopped. The parables that we studied this morning, that takes place on the Mount of Olives. All that He told there about the destruction of Jerusalem, He's telling all those things, He's teaching all those things on the Mount of Olives, probably in that same Garden of Gethsemane that He'll be in the night before He dies, because that was His habit, and probably because it was midway point between where He did most of His work in Jerusalem and where He stayed at nights in Bethany. It will be that same journey that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where Jesus is going back and forth between Jerusalem and Bethany, that He curses the fig tree and things of that nature. So we see these things, and we begin to make sense of them from a geographical standpoint. In verse 7, it says that a woman came to Him with an alabaster vial, a very costly perfume, and she poured it on His head as He reclined at the table. So we can see all the people, and just as we've talked about, when we think about the Last Supper, they are reclining on their side. They didn't sit at tables like we sit at tables. I don't care what Da Vinci painted, right? They didn't sit at tables like that. They didn't sit in chairs. They reclined. They leaned on their side. That's how John is leaning against the breast of Jesus there on that last night before He died in the upper room. John tells us that the woman was Mary. Matthew doesn't give us her name, but John tells us exactly who it is, that it was Mary. And this is the sister of Martha and Lazarus. And she had a pound of this perfume. It was pure nard. It was an oil that came from the nard plant in India, and it was very expensive. In fact, Mark tells us in Mark 14:5 that it was worth 300 denarii. And so when we think about denarii, we're just basically thinking about a day's wage. And so it was almost basically a year's wages for this perfume, for this oil that she poured on Jesus' head and she poured on His feet. So this was very, very expensive if we just think about what we make in a year, and when we spend that on one thing that we're going to pour on somebody else, right? So we see the sacrifice in that gift. That, this was no small thing that Mary did as she poured these things upon Him. She poured the perfume on His head, poured it on His feet. Jesus stated in verse 12 that Mary did this to prepare Him for His burial. Jesus' burial on Friday afternoon, of course, He dies at 3, and certainly there was some amount of time for Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus to go to Pilate, get permission to take Jesus off the cross, and then take Him off, the effort of taking Him off the cross, and then getting Him to the tomb. And they've got to be getting this stuff done before 6 o'clock. And so within this 3-hour period, they have to do all of this. So some of the natural rites that they would do and things that they would do for the body to prepare the body probably were a little bit abbreviated so that they could get Him in the tomb before that 6 o'clock time. And so we know the ladies were watching where they took Him, where they left Him. And if you remember, immediately after the Sabbath day, on that Sunday morning before the sun even rose, those ladies are on their way out with spices to do it right. Right? They wanted to honor Jesus. They wanted to do the very best that they could for Him. These women that loved Him so dearly. And so, clearly things were going to be were going to be difficult in regard to the preparation of Jesus' dead body. And Mary really begins this effort here, doing what she can to prepare Him for His death. I think there's something that we don't want to miss here Of all the people. I mean, the disciples keep being told. In fact, they were told as they were coming to Jerusalem here, I'm going to die. And they don't want to hear anything about it. They don't want Jesus to talk about it. And oftentimes they fight with Jesus about it. When he tells them he's going to Jerusalem and the chief priests are going to put him to death, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to have the conversation. And yet, obviously, Jesus has said this to others as well. He said this to people beyond the disciples. And Mary seems to have been one of them. And she seems to understand something or is willing to accept what Jesus says, right? And she's making preparations for what everybody else is resisting. She's accepting. Jesus says he's going to die. I believe he's going to die then. I mean, this is the same woman, along with Martha, who, there was no doubt, there was no ambiguity in their heart or in their faith that when Jesus walked in John chapter 11 into the city of Bethany and came nearby, Martha came out and said, if you had been here, Lord, my brother wouldn't have died. I mean, there wasn't any ifs, ands, or buts about it. It wasn't, you could have done something about it. No, there was no might. He wouldn't have died. Mary comes out, if you'd have been here, Lord, my brother wouldn't have died. I mean, these women have great faith. And even when Jesus says he'll rise again, and Jesus certainly has a different idea when he makes that statement. Even Martha in her great faith says, yes, I know in the resurrection he will. She had such a faith in Jesus. And Jesus tells her, I'm the resurrection and the life. And then he asks her at the end of that, do you believe this? And she says, yes, of course I believe it. And so I think when Jesus spoke to these women at any rate, I think these women believed exactly what Jesus said. They didn't argue like the disciples. And I think that's why we see in this particular case, Mary, she's so in tune with what's going on. She really seems to be the only person that the Bible records for us that does seem to be in touch with the realities that Jesus has been saying all along is going to happen. The only one that seems to be willing to accept it and is doing something about it as she anoints him for his death. John said that the fragrance of the nard filled the house and that Mary wiped Jesus' feet with her hair. Folks, do not get this confused. Some people do. In fact, I see it when you look at your references in your Bible. It might have a footnote and it'll tell you the other gospel accounts where a certain event is recorded, right? So you can flip back and forth and see what the others say. They will include in there Luke chapter 7. The event in Luke chapter 7 is not this event. In Luke chapter 7, they were in a man's house named Simon, but he was Simon the Pharisee, not Simon the leper. And Simon's a very common name, right? Peter's name was Simon. And so they were there at Simon the Pharisee's house at that particular point, and a woman of sin, probably a prostitute, comes in, and she, she anoints his head. She washes his feet. They didn't wash his feet or anoint his head when he came in, which was common courtesy. And it says that she wiped his feet with her hair like Mary does here, but it's not the same story. Mary was not a prostitute. Mary was not a woman of sin. And so, we don't want to get those two stories confused because they simply are not the same story. But there are similarities in how the love of those two women treated Jesus on those particular occasions. Verses 8 and 9 says, but the disciples were indignant when they saw this and said, why the waste? For this perfume might have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor. When it says here that they are indignant, that word is angry. They're not just, come on, we could have sold that for something. They're mad at her. They're angry at her. They're talking down to her. They're mistreating her verbally in this particular case because of what she has done for Jesus in this instance. In John chapter 14, in verses 4 through 6, it reveals to us, John does, he reveals to us that Judas seemed to be the most outspoken in this effort. I'm going to tell you something about John. John refers to himself in the book as the disciple that Jesus loved, but John had a great love for Jesus. And really so different from the other gospel accounts, John's disdain for the actions of Judas are not very well hidden. He is brutally honest in regard to Judas, more so than anyone else. Listen to what he says in verses 4 through 6 of John 14. He says, "But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, who was intending to betray him." See, he doesn't ever let you forget what Judas is planning to do, what's going on in his mind right now at this point. He's planning to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to poor people?" Now listen to John's commentary on Judas's statement. Now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor. I mean, John, he's not holding back, is he? He's not concerned about the poor. He says he didn't ask that because of that, but because he was a thief. I mean, John tells it like it is. And I love it when people go, well, there's religious churches out there that will literally say we only operate off the book of the writings of John because he was the disciple of love. You catch this? Oh, he's a loving person, but he doesn't hold back in regard to Judas. He says, but because he was a thief and as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. So he says he was a thief, and let me tell you what he used to do. He used to take the money that was given to the Lord to support the work that the Lord was doing, and he put it in his own pocket. John doesn't want you to ever forget the kind of person that Judas was at this point. There is so much with Judas. In this statement right here that we have that John gives us commentary to, there is a great deal of hypocrisy, isn't there? There is a mask, as we talked about hypocrisy before, there is a mask on him that says, I care about the poor, but John says, no, he didn't. He didn't care about the poor at all. And so he wore a mask of hypocrisy in making this statement. And the mask was a mask that was hiding the greed that was ultimately in his heart, that he had been stealing those funds from the ministry of Jesus. And I think when we first see, we see Jesus first begin to talk about one who was going to betray him right there at the end of the events of the feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6, about a little over a year from this point that we're at right now, earlier. And Jesus begins to talk about someone going to betray him, someone's of the devil. Things begin to, it seems, percolate in Judas's heart. Judas wants wealth. He wants power, clearly. And on that particular occasion, maybe the root cause of it beginning is the people, 5,000 people want to be Jesus' army, right? And Jesus says, I don't want any part of that. And to Judas, he's asking why. We have a chance here to really have a 5,000-man army. We'll be good to go. And he sees that maybe Jesus isn't going the direction he wants him to go. All the disciples have a problem with wanting to be in the greatest positions, right? James and John asked for that position. Have their mother ask Jesus for the right and the left hand. They're all kind of seeking that power, but Judas is a little more nefarious with his. He really will seek it at any cost, it seems. And so we see him here, we see him at that particular point, and at this moment, this event that's taking place in this house in Bethany, it seems to be the breaking point for Judas. This is where things go downhill rapidly for him. It's in his mind. He's thinking about it. It's going on in his mind. It's in his heart. He's let it dwell there, obviously, for some time. And he's about to get the reason in his own mind to go all the way and do something that is so terrible that Jesus said it would have been better if he had never been born. And I think there's a lesson for us in regard to Judas and his greed and his hypocrisy, is that if we let these kind of things exist in our life, they'll get the best of us eventually. I mean, he made it a year. If it began at the feeding of the 5,000, he made it for over a year with this in his heart. And he may have thought he had it under control, but clearly he didn't. And he does that terrible act. Beginning with verse 10. But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good deed to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. For when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for my burial. Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will be spoken of in memory of her." So Jesus scolds the disciples. He scolds them for bothering her. Mark tells us that Jesus told them to just straight up leave her alone. Stop bothering her. She's doing something good for me and you're treating her terrible. A just Jesus can't abide that. The mistreatment of someone doing good. A just God doesn't abide that. We see that in the book of Revelation, that He will deal with such individuals. She had done good, and she had done what she could, according to Mark, for him and his death. She did that good deed out of a deep love that she had for Jesus. Jesus addressed the fake care for the poor. He doesn't call them out like like John did, right? Like he called out Judas. But Jesus makes a point. You'll always have the poor. It's always going to be poor people. There's always going to be people you can help. You're not always going to have me. And within a week, Mary won't be able to do anything else good for Jesus because He's going to be dead in the grave on that next Saturday night. And so she understood the need to do good for Jesus, and He commends her for that. Jesus said in John that He would, to let her keep the remainder, whatever she didn't pour on His head, whatever she didn't pour on His feet. He says, let her keep it. Because I'm sure they were pressuring her to sell what they had left, right? Okay, well, you wasted some of it. Let's sell the rest of it. And Jesus says, let her keep it for my burial. See, Jesus is still making those statements. And that statement's just blowing right by them, isn't it? The disciples aren't picking up on that. It doesn't seem, or they're just ignoring it, or they just don't want to hear it. But it just blows right. Let her keep it for my burial. Because it's not going to be very far off. Verse 13, I love what's said there. And I think we can just read past that and just not get the lesson that we should. Truly I say to you, Jesus says, that wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will be spoken of in memory of her. And here we are nearly 2,000 years later, and we're still talking about her. And we're still talking about her love and what she did for Jesus on that night. Folks, what we give to Jesus means a lot to Him. I think sometimes we can almost get this idea that, our stuff, what we have the ability to do is so small that God's like, okay, great, thank you. But it means a lot to God. It means a lot to Jesus when we sacrifice for Him. We give to Him. He hasn't changed any since the time that He sat there in that house in Bethany. And He was so appreciative that He made certain that she would be known for the ages as long as this earth lasts. Mary will be talked about because Jesus appreciated her love and the sacrifice. I don't know where she got all that money. I know she could have spent it on other things, couldn't she? Could have had her some nice outfits. But she gave it to the Lord. She poured it on His feet and poured it on His head in an incredible act of love. And Jesus said, that deserves to be remembered. Such a humble act. And yet Jesus saw it and He remembered it. The rebuke from Jesus in this particular instance seems to push Judas to follow through on those thoughts about betraying Jesus. Because in each of the accounts that we have, it is at this point, after Jesus rebukes him here, that it says that he went to the chief priests. And he asked them, what will you give me to betray him to you? And they weighed out for him 30 pieces of silver, Mark tells us. And Matthew tells us as well. Can you imagine the level of greed that existed in his heart? To do what he is going to do. To have seen what Judas saw. I would love to have just seen a week of Jesus' ministry. We have about 3 weeks recorded in Scripture. And Judas spent over 3 years. While Jesus was doing what John said that the world could not record, could not hold the books if you told everything that Jesus did. And he saw all that. He watched him still the storms on the Sea of Galilee. He watched Lazarus come out of that tomb. He watched sick person after sick person after sick person be healed of everything and anything you can imagine. He watched demons come out of people. He has seen Jesus do everything that Jesus pretty much did. And he says 30 pieces of silver is enough for me to give him to you. Folks, there's a heart of darkness there. And sin has a way of really magnifying that heart. Because somewhere deep down in Judas, really, he loved Jesus. But greed and sin and desire, lust, whatever you want to use, it overrode it. It suppressed it, as we might say today. Because on that Friday morning, after Pilate condemned Jesus to death and Judas heard about it, he was shocked. He was brokenhearted to the extent that he would go out and hang himself. Throw the money into the temple. Because can't take blood money into the temple, right? You can pay it out of the temple, but you can't take it in. That's kind of hypocritical in and of itself. Do you ever wonder why? Wasn't that his plan? Why are you so sorrowful now? For the reason I just mentioned. Judas saw everything Jesus did. And he said somewhere in himself, obviously, he thought, there's no way you can convict Jesus. He never did anything wrong, right? I'll make a quick buck. I'll move on. Jesus will be fine. But that's not the way it worked out, was it? Somewhere he loved him. And when he found out he was going to be killed, it broke his heart with what he had done. And, there was just no ability within him, it seems, to go back to Jesus and ask for his forgiveness like Peter did. I know for a fact that Jesus would have taken him back. That's how the Lord is. And but with Judas here in this particular case, this is where it seems to begin, is at this moment where he realizes that Jesus really isn't in this for the money. 300 denarii. I would probably guess they never had 300 denarii in the purse that Jesus had. And you see that Jesus just has no interest in that whatsoever. And for a greedy person, he realizes he just hooked his wagon to the wrong horse, right? It's not going to take me where I want to go. So he goes to the chief priest. When we look at Mary, we see love. A year's wages. And she didn't spend it on herself. She is the embodiment of another before self. She didn't spend it on herself. She spent it to do a kindness to the Lord that she loved. We look at Judas and we see greed. And everything about it was of all for him. What will you give me if I give him to you? And he got it all for himself. And he was willing to give up Jesus for 4 months' wages. Not even close to what Mary gave up did he receive for Jesus. I think about later in the New Testament whenever we see Paul and he is about to be put to death in 2 Timothy chapter 4. And you know, so many years before, him and John Mark had a falling out because John Mark had turned back in the first missionary journey. In fact, it was over John Mark that him and Barnabas would not go together on the second missionary journey. He didn't want to have anything else to do with John Mark. But here he is, the older Paul, the wiser Paul, the more experienced Paul. And he's writing to young Timothy who's ready to give up. And he sets forth an example, and it's an example for us as well, of who Timothy can be. He's got a choice. Paul says Demas, who we see mentioned in other places in Paul's writings, a person who accompanied Paul, was a part of his group, his close group. He says, Demas has left me. He's left me for this present world. There's something Demas wanted for himself more than he wanted in serving the Lord with Paul. And then he says, bring John Mark. Oh, before he fought not to have anything to do with him. Now he says, bring him to me. I have a use for him. Because John Mark has given himself to the Lord. Mark in your Bibles is by his hand. He said, I have a use for him. And he presents a choice to Timothy there in that text. Timothy, you're ready. You're thinking about giving up. You're thinking about quitting. You can either be a Demas who will leave me, or you can be a John Mark who has a use in the kingdom of God. We look at Judas and we look at Mary and we see one who left Jesus for this world and one who had a powerful use because of the love that she had in her heart. It will always be Jesus versus me. That's at the crux of every one of our lives. Whether it's what I want or whether it's what Jesus wants. Whether it's my will or His will be done. This evening I hope and pray that in that battle where the rubber meets the road between my will and His will, I hope and pray for each of your lives that His will wins out. That His will, as Jesus said, is done. If not, make that change today. If we can assist you, we want to do so. Won't you come as we stand there? Rise up and fill with the name of